So I mentioned that tonight we don't only bring in Shabbat, but also Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which means if you look in the sky tonight and search out the moon, there will be at best the tiniest sliver of light. But have no fear, light is increasing not only on the Hanukkah menorah, but also in the cosmos. Each night the moon will wax larger again and more bright. This Rosh Chodesh has 2 days. Some have 1, some have 2. The month of Tevet has 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. So tomorrow we're going to be singing Hallel, not only because of Chanukah, but also because of Rosh Chodesh. The second night of Rosh Chodesh Tevet, so that is tomorrow night, the 7th night of Chanukah, is another holiday, not well known, but I want to call attention to it tonight. It is a custom of North African Jews to dedicate the 7th day of Chanukah to women. And the holiday is called Chag HaBanot, the festival of the daughters. So what is this about? You may know that in traditional Judaism, there is this approach that says because women have so many responsibilities for home and family life, they are exempt from positive time-bound mitzvot. So positive means thou shalt, not the thou shalt nots, but the thou shalts. Time-bound meaning a specific time, like taking up the lulav and etrog, right? That's a positive mitzvah, time-bound specifically for Sukkot. In traditional Judaism, women are not obligated to fulfill that kind of a mitzvah. It doesn't mean they can't, by the way. It just means they are not obligated. They are exempted from that mitzvah, that positive time-bound mitzvah, should they choose. There are some exceptions, and 3 of them are related to holidays, so I'll name them. One is drinking 4 cups of wine at the Seder table, positive time-bound mitzvah. Another is to listen to the reading of Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther on Purim. And the third, wouldn't you know it, is in the lighting of the Hanukkah candles. So how does this come to be? What's this all about? Why are these 3 positive time-bound mitzvot now attached to women specifically? Not exempted, but they must participate in the mitzvah. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi gives a rationale that women were involved in the miracle. And the word can be translated, even women were involved in the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt, of the religious freedom that was reclaimed, the genocide that was avoided in the time of Esther and Mordechai, and the reclaiming of the temple and our religious freedoms at the time of the Maccabees. So where were women in those stories? Well, I think the Purim one is the most obvious, right? We know that Esther had a major role to play in bringing about that miracle. And so we can connect the dots in a straight line that women should fulfill the mitzvah of hearing Megillat Esther at Purim time. What about Pesach? If you look, you don't even have to look so carefully, there are many women in the Pesach story who helped to bring about the miracles. There was Shifra and Puah, the first conscientious objectors who refused they were the midwives who refused to follow Pharaoh's command and toss the baby boys into the Nile River. There was Yocheved, Moses' mother, and Miriam, Moses' sister, and even Pharaoh's daughter had a major role to play in drawing Moses out from the river and raising him as her own. So we don't have to look too far to see how women were a part of bringing about the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt. So yes, women should fulfill the positive time-bound mitzvot of sitting at the Seder table and raising up a cup for the 4 cups of wine. But what about Hanukkah? We talk about Judah and his brothers. We talk about Matityahu. We just named them in the Al Hanisim prayer. But no mention of the role that women may have played in bringing about the miracle in their time. So I want to point out that the later super commentators said we shouldn't translate this line in the Talmud to mean even women. We should translate it instead to mean especially women. Rashbam and Rashi agree that we should translate it to mean especially women had a role in bringing about the miracles of these 3 festivals. They did not play a passive role. They weren't just witnessing the miracles that came their way, God-given or won by the men, but they actively pursued bringing about the miracles themselves. So who were they? I think the reason why we don't talk about the women heroes of Hanukkah is not because we don't know who they are, but because their stories are so hard to say out loud. And they are certainly hard to hear. So I'm going to only point in their direction. It doesn't feel quite Shabbistic to go into the details, but I will mention that in the 4th book of Maccabees, we are introduced to a woman named Hannah, who is the mother of 7 sons. And with her encouragement, they allowed themselves to be martyred rather than pray to the foreign gods and the idols and to Antiochus' plan. Each son would step forward, recite a verse of Torah, and dedicate himself to the one God, and then his life was ended right before their mother's eyes. And so Hannah is one of the heroes of Hanukkah, because through her strength and courage and her faith, they were able to bear witness to God even under such circumstances, such trying times. A second woman is named Yehudit, which means Jewess. She was the Jewish woman of consequence in her time. And we read about her in the book of Judith, found not in the Tanakh, not in the Hebrew Bible, but rather in the Apocrypha, which is kept in the Catholic Bible and in the Greek Orthodox Bibles. We once had it written in Hebrew. The original Hebrew of the book of Judith was lost to us, but we do have the translations, the early translations that went into Greek. And so we can read about Judith and her great heroism, her courage when she beheaded the enemy general Holofernes in her time. And through a little bit of midrashic connecting of the dots, we can remember her at Hanukkah time. The third example of women in the Hanukkah story is told in another Megillah that was nearly lost to us, called Megillat Antiochus, written somewhere between the 2nd and 8th century of the Common Era. And there it is written in this, we are introduced to a sister of the Maccabees. Matityahu had a daughter, and her name is also Hannah. And it was the law of the land that any bride, before being united with her husband, would have to go to the bed of the ruling power at the time. So this daughter of Matityahu, apparently, according to this centuries-old scroll, she was the impetus for the Maccabean revolt. She was the trigger, the one who called to arms her brothers. How did she do this? By publicly calling attention to the horror that would be hers on her wedding night. And her brothers were embarrassed about her display, her public display, and they went to cover her up and to hush her down, and she said, "How dare you? Do something." And so they did. And so it may have been that the rabbis who say, especially women, were thinking of this Hannah, who was the spark that lit the Maccabean revolt and led eventually to the reclaiming of the temple. So tomorrow night, Chag Habanot, the festival of our daughters, I would like to encourage you to light each one of the 7 candles in honor of the women you know, the women you admire, the women in your lives, the women who have gone on from this life, but you still remember them and admire them and tell their stories. Pick up some of the stories of the women of Jewish history, even the ones who are too often unknown, untold. There's a remarkable resource now online called the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, because Jewish women's stories were not often told in the historic encyclopedias, like Encyclopedia Judaica and so on. Women were underrepresented. So now there is this incredible collection, some very academically researched articles and some more accessible. So please, I want to urge you to get to know that resource, and maybe you can pick out 7 different characters there and tell their stories by the light of the 7 candles. I'm going to conclude with calling attention to one hero who is known to you. Chana Senesh is well known as a hero of contemporary Jewish history, but just in recent years, a notebook of her earliest poetry when she was a child has now been dedicated to the National Library of Israel. And through their resources, now we have access to her earliest poetry. Hanukkah, 1933, in Budapest. Chana Senesh was 12 years old, and she wrote this poem. On Hanukkah, the candles are kindled. Every Jewish heart quivers. In our hearts rise up memories of nations long since past, ancient and great. We recall the days of Egyptian suffering and the mighty kingdom of Greece, yet our strength was not broken by any foreign rule. We carry our Torah from place to place. From there we drew our faith and our virtue. We wandered through the wildernesses, hungry and destitute, but God was with us. We will never be alone. We are descended from the same ancestors of strength. We will not give up. These candles encourage us at every turn. Fear not, O people Israel. The time is yet to come. So Shabbat Shalom, Chag Chanukah Sameach, and Rosh Chodesh Tov, and happy Chag Habanot as well.